20 years or so that I've been a fish ecologist, I've come to realise that whilst rivers on their surface appear to be quite simple habitats, they're quite narrow, they flow in one direction, when you actually look below that reflective surface, what you see are quite complex ecosystems. And they have a beauty and a diversity that rivals any coral reef or tropical rainforest. So I've also come to realise that our rivers and the fish that live in them are in big trouble. So about 40% of the 350 odd freshwater species that we have in Australia are on some sort of threatened species list. Many are so rare that they're at risk of extinction. Within the Murray-Darling Basin, we've got about 90% fewer fish now than we used to have. We've lost these fish because we've degraded their habitats, we've dammed the rivers, we've put concrete and steel across their migratory pathways. We've introduced invasive species, we've over-extracted from their habitats. For these fellas, it really is a case of a death by 1,000 cuts. And it's why I've spent my career as a fisheries scientist trying to shed light on those cuts and to help people look after fish, to help develop the insights and innovations that can help recover our fish species. And my research in particular is focused around how we can make water infrastructure more fish friendly. So whether that be dams, hydropower, irrigation weirs, diversions, fishways. And one particular innovation I've been working on for over a decade now is the use of modern fish screens. It has the potential to save millions of fish, but it also has the potential to be a big winner for farms and a boom for regional economies. Now, before I tell you a bit more about these modern fish screens, how they work and what we're doing to try to see more of them installed across Australia, I want to introduce you to a few people first. This is Andrew and Marinarix. They're organic almond farmers from down on the lower Darling-Barker River. I met Andrew and Marina a few years back when I was assessing 3 river screens that they had installed on their pump intake. These are really fine mesh screens. They're 50 microns, so the holes are so small you can't actually even see them. These screens rotate and they're water cleaned. And I sat down and I had a cup of tea with Andrew because I wanted to understand why he was prepared to invest his own money in these screens. And it was clearly apparent that these guys were absolutely wrapped in how these screens were performing. They get no fish or debris into their irrigation system. Because of that, they had a $30,000 inline filter that they used to backflush hourly every day. They don't have to do that anymore. It saves them a huge amount of water and it saves them money. And they've got the confidence that their expensive almond trees and state-of-the-art drip system is protected. So they saw these screens as a real asset to their business. But it wasn't the only reason why they screened. You see, these guys, they were quite devastated by those catastrophic fish kills that occurred down on the lower Darling a few years back. And they wanted to do what they could do to help recover native fish populations. You see, these screens merely reflected how Andrew and Marina saw the world. They were industry leaders, they were sustainable farmers, and they believed in helping people look after fish. We see a similar story if we head north to the Macquarie River, where we can meet Jason, Jim and Shane. Now they're members of the Trangi-Nevertai Irrigation Scheme. It's a member-owned and operated cooperative of about 33 farms. They irrigate about 800 hectares of mixed cropping. They take their water from the Macquarie Womble River. A few years ago, we helped them install 4 modern fish protection screens. These are cone screens with a 3mm mesh. And we've been working with them for over a couple of seasons now to look at the difference that this has been making in the entrainment of fish. And the results are stark. So they're now saving thousands of fish being sucked out of the river. These are some of the species. Like we see a lot of these juvenile catfish and Murray cod. that are no longer getting taken into their irrigation system. And there's a diversity of other fish and other aquatic life like shrimp. We're seeing farmers increasingly do this across Australia and across our river systems, like Curly down on the Lachlan, or Jim out on the Lower Darling, or Alex out at Dubbo. These guys are industry leaders, they're environmental stewards, and they're smart farmers. The problem we do have, though, is that these stories are still too few and far between, because most of our pumps and gravity-fed diversions across our river systems either aren't screened or they use old trash screens that are basically poor performers. These are what those trash screens look like. They provide little fish protection, and they do a pretty poor job at keeping debris out of the irrigation system. And this is what it can look like. So that photo on the left there shows fish and leaves clogging an inline filter. You can see here fish perishing on a paddock, where they also get in and block siphon tubes. Or we can just have poor design screens that block and create a headache for farmers. There is a better way, and that's in these modern fish protection screens. So let's step back and talk about how they work. Effectively, the difference between that and a traditional trash rack, I suppose, is they change the hydraulics in front of the intake. So whereas at a traditional screen, the velocities are just way too high and the mesh is too coarse, and because of that, fish are sucked into the pump or diversion or pinned against the mesh. When you actually look at a modern screen, it's got a much finer mesh but a much larger surface area. So that same flow is spread across the entire surface area of the screen. Because of that, at any point on that screen, that suction is much lower. And that's what makes it safer for fish and easier to keep clean. And the critical thing that achieves this without changing the volume of water that can be extracted or the rate at which it can be extracted. So water can still go to where the farmer needs it without the fish and the debris. And we've done research for over 10 years to determine how to tailor these for Australian conditions. And if we get the design right, we know that we can save over 90% of fish at the intake. And this is what it looks like. You can see a Murray cod bopping along on the screen surface there, and it can quite happily do so because there's very little suction on that screen. Now here's the best part. Nothing that I'm talking about here is new. It's not my idea. They've been using these modern fish protection screens in other parts of the world for close to a century, in countries like the US and New Zealand. All that we've been doing is running a catalytic program called Fish Screens Australia to show how to do it here in Australia. We've been finding the best technologies from overseas, bringing to Australia and getting them in the hands of early adopters to showcase with industry. Like I said, we've been doing the research for over a decade now to tailor these screens for Australian fish and Australian farms. We've been bringing together farmers, fishers, scientists, engineers, managers, so that we can be all applying best practice and moving forward towards a common goal. And because of that, we're seeing real cut through. So we're seeing screening now included in more and more Commonwealth and state plans, like the Native Fish Recovery Strategy or the New South Wales 50-year water strategy. And this is leading to real investment in rivers. Like the $20 million that's been invested as part of the Northern Basin Toolkit to install over 130 screens throughout the Murray-Darling Basin and in your very backyard down on the lower Macquarie River. This level of investment in screening is going to keep millions of native fish in the river where they belong, where they can thrive, where they can breathe, where they can replenish future populations. And it will transform the health of this river system. And it will also greatly improve your fishing. Now, don't get me wrong, screening isn't going to be the silver bullet. We also need to be doing things like dealing with cold water pollution. We need to be building fishways. We need to be restoring habitat, re-snagging. We need to be dealing with those pesky invasive species. But collectively, these things may be the silver buckshot that we need to recover our dwindling native fish populations. And importantly, screening is an important part of that story. And if we get that screening right, we've got a future, not only better farming, but healthier rivers, vibrant communities, and importantly, better fishing. Thank you.